Let me now move to Yasmin Waljee on the far right, another hotshot lawyer with Hogan and Lovells, but in a very interesting position because it's work on a pro bono basis, looking to deliver service to charities, individuals and social enterprises who would otherwise not be able to actually afford legal advice. So they don't know that they could pay for Hogan and Lovells in normal circumstances. Super interesting work on human rights, cases linked to crime and terrorism and victims thereof, and again someone who has received many honors. And also really interesting, she's the director of a charity to raise the aspirations of girls from minority communities called Mosaic Network. And Yasmin is okay with me also saying that she has a very interesting background. She's British, but she has links to Kenya, Tanzania, and way back to Gujarat in the western part of India. And I think that's going to be relevant to what she's going to go on and say. Last but not least, Nataliane Thoulon from Sodexo. She's Vice President of Client Relations and Strategic Projects. And I think Nataliane is also one of the live examples of the Sodexo success story. Whilst they're very critical of themselves, and Michelle is very critical of Sodexo, saying that they've got so much more to do, well, they've done a hell of a lot already, and the fact that she's been with that company, I think, for almost 18 years and has gravitated up to the position that she occupies now is a testament to that. She's managed to survive spells in Scotland, studying in Dundee and starting work for Sodexo in Scotland. She's also worked in Canada, so she knows what it's like to be away from headquarters and indeed in a supply chain of a major multinational, and is a specialist in strategic planning, having carried out Sodexo's global study on market potential positioning and strategy in global healthcare in particular. She is a member of the steering committee of SWIFT. SWIFT is not a payment system in this case, so those of you who are wondering, but she'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And also very interesting play on words, she is a member of the French gender balance network Univers. Please, a quick round of applause for our three, not contestants, but speakers. Very briefly, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on three particular areas of discussion. We've done a little bit of preparatory work beforehand, but we thought in terms of using the time most effectively. There's a big context that we have at play in terms of boosting social impact today and tomorrow, whether you're looking at it from the perspective of an NGO, a multinational, an international organization, or others, and that is looking very big picture at global goals that have been established, and I'll cite a couple. The SDGs have just been endorsed in New York at the UNGA, and SDG number 5 is gender equality and women's empowerment. The G20 has also taken a commitment to reduce the gender gap in the labor market, participation rates by 25% in 2025. I know a lot of people think that's not enough, but it's a hell of a lot more than exists today, and a certain role that the OECD played in that. Now, what we're talking about there is 100 million more women entering the labor force, okay? That's a wonderful idea, but how do we actually deliver on it? And the first area we're going to focus on is the need for a more integrated approach, or indeed, do we need an integrated approach? And in this context, what I want to do is kick things off with Marissa and your experiences in asking you, in the corporate sphere, surely it's enough to have economic empowerment programs to address women's empowerment, and that's, you know, we do that, and we're gonna get to our 100 billion.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And the leading question. Coming out of the corporate sphere, you would think that I would be very pro-economic empowerment, and I am. I mean, I've gotten involved in these issues because of the deep appreciation and belief I have in seeing the enormous work that corporations have been doing increasingly in the past 10 or 15 years on working to economically empower women, not only in their own cross supply and value chains. And that's hugely important. Economic empowerment, as any working woman knows, is a critical piece of gender equality. But as we feel at the Win-Win Coalition, which, just to give you a little context, was a I didn't found it. It was I coordinate it. And it is a coalition of corporations, corporate foundations, private foundations, women's organizations, and other women's funds who have come together to work in a cross-sector way on women's empowerment and making women's empowerment programs more impactful, co-create programs that are more impactful for both business and for women, and have greater effect. So the way we think about this is really, we think about the fact that there are many issues, as anyone who just heard the McKinsey report, which I feel like is sort of manna from heaven, because it's exactly what we've been talking about, which is that in order to have economic empowerment be truly impactful for women, you need to actually look at the specific context. And that's a context whether you're in the developing world or in the more advanced economies. As the McKinsey report points out, they may be different in different contexts, and so it's very important to understand your context. And there are a lot of organizations that have been working in those contexts that are gender experts. A number of women's funds, like the Global Fund for Women, you saw Musimbi Kenyoro earlier, and other women's organizations that work locally on these types of issues. And by partnering with corporations on working on these issues, they can, a number of issues, the economic empowerment programs can be far more impactful. For just to give a quick example, I mean, if you have a program, say, in factories providing skills or employing more women, if the women walk out of the factory door and have to hand over the money to their fathers or their brothers because they have no safe place to save, it doesn't actually give them any control over those resources. If they have no access to any reproductive health care to help them plan their families, it's a problem. If there are limited property rights or inheritance rights, the impact, their long-standing impact of that money is not going to be terribly helpful. And if the economic impact, if the economic empowerment does not truly empower them and give them control and voice, it doesn't have the impact that you need to get to that, 12 trillion by 2025 in the McKinsey report. So you need to address these host of issues that in order to really make these programs effective. And businesses may not be able to do them and shouldn't be expected to do them all on their own, but there are a lot of good partners out there to work with.
Yasmin, let me bring you in from your experience and vantage point. We're hearing here that the intra-corporation environment, it's not enough. You've done quite a lot of work also in opening and broadening the minds of people who are within companies to those societal elements that go beyond the company. Interesting to maybe hear a little bit more in detail about that, how it plays out, this integrated approach.
So I work for a major global law firm, about 7,000 people worldwide, and about 45 different offices in maybe 20-odd countries. And against that background, we have done, like many of you, introduced global standards on empowerment of women within the workforce. We have set a gender strategy. We have done everything that you might want to do, shared parental leave, all the policies that you might expect within a global corporation like my own. But actually, we know that societal issues play very much into gender equality in the workplace. And so we've extended that and recognized that by implementing a commitment of every single member of the firm, lawyer and non-lawyer, giving at least 25 hours a year towards giving their skill set to NGOs and communities around the world to tackle gender inequality. So for a corporate lawyer, that might be working with a social enterprise that is looking at women's issues, at trying to get women's empowerment more widely spread, or within the litigation community, challenging discrimination.
How easy is it to get a hotshot lawyer who's very used to doing other things to suddenly do that? You're telling us the theory, and I get the theory, but what about the practice? How easy to break through the crust and then people's sort of the scales fall from the eyes?
The truth is that actually everyone is motivated by something that they find really challenging. And if you can find the right project for the right person, you can easily inspire them to get involved. And we've been involved with so many amazing NGOs and so many inspiring individuals, one of whom is here, one of our clients, Thoulon from the Barefoot College, who I think you'll hear from a bit later. But just hearing these stories is enough to say, actually, I really want to do something. So we've got lawyers doing trafficking work, claiming compensation for victims of trafficking. And last year we raised over £1 million worth of compensation as a result of their efforts. Now, that's something I have seen people get extremely passionate about, and these are mainstream corporate lawyers.
Let me ask you, Nataliane, now to talk about briefly about an integrated approach in Sodexo, because we heard 420,000 people, 80 countries. How the hell do you get integration there? You've clearly done it. You've got some great results, but how the hell do you do it? And it's not a payment system.
It's not a payment system. We wish it was. But it's an investment system, I would say, rather than a payment system. We have set up in Sodexo, well, when I say we, really Michel Landel, our CEO, who is really the leader behind the business, but also the leader behind the gender diversity and gender balance issues in the company. He decided that he needed to have an advisory board or a governance body that would help him bridge the field. As you said, 80 countries, 420,000 employees worldwide. We need to make sure that that we understand what's going on in the field, and also that we help the field make things happen in terms of gender balance. So he created SWIFT, which is this advisory board of 35 members. We started with women only because we needed to get comfortable with the idea first. And now that we're comfortable, we're having men, because we know we can't succeed without men in SWIFT. So we're working together. There's a steering committee made of 6 members, including men, of which I'm part of, and we make the link between the C-suite and what's happening in the field, and we work on several initiatives, such as making our HR processes evolve so that we can promote more women through the ranks through better recruitment. We work on leadership development programs, on mentoring programs. We work on flexibility and work-life balance. And we spread the good practices that we gather in all the countries. We make them visible. We try to communicate also about gender balance to convince people that it's also a key to performance for the business and for the quality of life of our people and of our consumers. And we work on all these initiatives, and we report to the COMEX, to the C-suite, to tell them this is what's happening, this is where we have roadblocks, this is where we need you to push more. And it's really a long-term work that we're all engaged in, but it's an investment. We all have a full-time job, and we do that on top of it. But I think everybody in SWIFT and everybody who is involved in the different networks in the countries is very engaged toward gender balance. And this investment, I think, is also making the success of Sodexo.
One thing I would just say, which I am so impressed with when we talked on the phone, was the way that you really have gotten out of silos in the corporation and really worked across the entire corporation to be so effective, because it's something that's very hard to do. And it's something that's critical, but I'm working trying to get people out of their silos in the women's space and the corporate space and the development space. And those are different silos. You obviously do the same thing working across sector, but within an organization to be able to do that is terribly powerful to create change.
And it's not easy every day.
and not easy.
We've heard, I think, three testimonies there which are reasonably concrete. I think that the more we're able to also refer to elements that are concrete in terms of programs that are delivering, the more one can convince people who may have doubts on these issues. And we're going to come back at in the third area to questions of measurement and impact. But before moving into that space, I wanted us to dwell a little bit on transversal issues and global supply chains, which are pretty critical when you're looking at the roles that corporations can play, but also roles that different actors can play in this desire to boost social impact, whether it's the NGO or whether it is indeed international organizations such as my own that establish de facto global standards for international actors to work in particular, for example, in a field like the supply chain of a multinational company. In the prior discussion that we had before the panel, there was a great deal of focus on the challenge in bringing different elements together when you're looking at discrimination and what in a sense is holding women back. How many things can hold women back and the different areas that they can touch on. And I'm just going to give you a little list of elements. Discriminatory family code, restricted physical integrity, son bias, I think that's son, daughter, son bias, restricted resources and assets, and restricted civil liberties. I haven't mentioned property law or religious law, I have now. But the five that I mentioned, actually, they form part of an index that the Development Center of the OECD has put together called CIGI, where we're looking to measure across 160 countries. And that's bringing up some very interesting results. But let me turn now firstly to Yasmin on this question, because you've got the legal background, so the stuff around law and legal frameworks is something that is second nature to you, and at the same time also you know what it's like maybe to be from a minority community in an environment, and how you can reconcile certain elements that may involve different legal frameworks in different parts of the world, and how can we grapple with problems of this type which relate to supply chains in the case of companies operating in different countries with those different cultures, etc., to actually bring some sort of impact and change and not run counter to that diversity at the same time?
That's a challenging question. I think it's interesting within the UK that they've taken a leadership role around the idea of modern-day slavery and ensuring that women are not facing forced labour situations, and we now have some accountability at the corporate level to address the accountability within the supply chains for those types of issues. It's going to be a very challenging one, because how far can you go down that supply chain route and account for what happens further down? But the UK has implemented a disclosure provision for all companies over about 36 million. But that's only one aspect of it. That's trying to bring in supply chain issues within the corporate environment. We have procurement strategies now, I'm sure Sodexo does, as trying to prioritise women-led businesses within the supply chain. And I think we need to think more about that, about how we can see the woman as an investable proposition and her business as an investable proposition, and bring that into our supply chains. The cultural issues that you talk about are really challenging, and that comes from minority communities sometimes retaining very traditional practices, where even if surrounding legislation, corporate policy, all sorts of things can't get to the underlying issues that exist within communities. So you have, as part of my charity, we mentor young British Muslims who face really challenging situations. They're grade A students, but unfortunately, if you ask them, what about going to the leading universities in the UK, they will say, my father won't let me. And at that point, no amount of law or all sorts of other practices is going to change it. This is a family cultural issue. So then we need...
I note it's the father not letting.
Yes, yes. Almost. Not totally, but it often is that way. And so how do you address that? Actually, you have to address that, I think, on a peer-to-peer. So when that happens, we have a charity that we support at Hogan Lovells that will encourage professionals from a Muslim background going in to mentor young women and actually talking to their fathers and stressing the education. But actually, his education lies at the heart of Islam. And so there is actually no contradiction between allowing your young daughters to aspire to be their best.
But it sounds like it's something where you have to make the case, actively make the case. I'm wondering, when you're looking at what you're going to do in the Win-Win Coalition, in articulating these elements, what comes into your mind there, Marissa, in terms of how to grapple with tough stuff like that?
No, I think those are the kinds of issues that very much come up when you're working in communities where you're working on an economic empowerment program and you want to bring more people in. say you want to bring more adolescent girls into programs. How do you actually do that? And that, with the advantage of working with groups on the ground, is similar to your peer example, is you're working with women and girls in the communities who have led the way in some ways, or who know how to speak to the families, know how to speak to the communities, engage with the community leaders to talk about the value to the family, to the community. And so that, having that actually helps to reinforce. But it's hard to do that unless you're actually, part of that community, which is why you need to work with, often with groups that are very, very local when you're trying to be effective, most effective in your programs locally.
When you look at, you're in you are a member of supply chain. Sodexo is an integral part of that. When you look at that, what are the steps that a multinational like Sodexo is taking to look to have greater inclusion? And are there specific areas that you're looking to address? You were mentioning things like work-life balance to me earlier.
Yeah, I think if you look at Sodexo, our value chain goes from our suppliers to the employees who deliver the services on the sites where we operate. So you can actually look at social progress in both areas. We traditionally in our P&L say we have our major costs are the food costs, because the heart of our business is providing food services, and labor costs, because obviously we have people providing those services. So if you look at those costs, not as costs but as investment, you will look at how we buy the food products, and who we buy them from and where we buy them from, and you also look at how we treat the people who deliver the services, how you treat our labor, and how you make sure that they have the right work-life balance, so that they bring the best of themselves to our 75 million consumers across the world. So looking at supply chain on one hand, obviously we do buy from large companies because we need to provide the right amount of food consistently, day in, day out, whether it's on an offshore platform or in a hospital or on a mining camp or in a school. We have to bring the right amount of food to the people every day, day in and day out. So we need to rely on suppliers that we choose carefully, obviously. But we also need, and this is the heart of Sodexo, and this is the way it was founded, we need to contribute to the progress of the communities where we operate. We hire people from those communities, we buy from those communities, and one of the ways that we invest in those communities is by buying from small and medium enterprises. So just because Sodexo is a large company doesn't mean it only buys from the big Nestlés or the big Danones of the world. We also buy from all those small and medium businesses, and among those small and medium businesses we have women-owned enterprise. It's only 1/3, I think, of all the small and medium enterprises in the world that are owned by women. And Sodexo, as part of the Gender Balance Initiative and Inclusion Initiative, has made the choice to invest in those women-owned enterprises. And we are committing to increase our spending with the small and medium businesses to, I think, I'm looking at my notes, but it's $1 billion by 2017. So this effort will benefit to 5,000 businesses in 40 countries. And among those 5,000 businesses, there will be roughly 1,500 women-owned businesses that we will specifically invest in. So
Okay.
this is the supply chain inclusion program that we're implementing in 32 countries.
And I think we'll be hearing a little bit more about that tomorrow.
Exactly.
You've brought us into a terrain which is also it's a very important terrain close to the heart of my organisation and my heart, and many people's hearts when you're looking to convince them. It's heads and hearts, actually, that we're talking about here. And that is the question of measurement, measuring impact and meeting targets. Now, I was just having a quick exchange with Yasmin before we got on the stage, and she said, oh God, but we can't reduce everything down to measurement. I instinctively, there's a part of me that would agree with that. But if you want to convince people who don't necessarily have the same capacity mentally to grasp something that's intangible and that you know it when you see it type thing, you have to go into those spaces. And I know that this is something, Marissa, that you've been looking into quite carefully and in a quite sophisticated way as well. Tell us a little bit about how you see this goal of social impact and the need for data, and then how you can actually make that data address the heart and the mind?
Well, I mean, I think data is critical, and it's definitely part of it's very critical to the win-win coalition. And we're very new, obviously, and any hope to be effective, we feel we need to drive data both that shows social impact as well as business impact in very, very granular ways. There's lots of data out there that's very macro data about empowering women and how great it is for increasing productivity, GDP, health outcomes, education, many different outcomes. But you actually need to convince people to have really granular data on programs within businesses and how those make a difference. And we've seen actually very little of that in the economic empowerment programs that have been done. There are a few. The GAP has been very successful in its PACE program, which is a factory-based life skills and technical skills program, and measuring data, working with the International Center for Research on Women. And I think they now are having, I heard that Yale has actually independently gone into their data to try to drill down more on real detailed business impact, which I think is great, because that's how we'll really drive change, by showing people that by doing these things, you can achieve your social goals in your business and also improve the business for long-term sustainable impact.
How do you actually go about measuring what you guys treasure in terms of gender balance in Sodexo?
Well, we always say what gets measured gets done. Absolutely. And if we don't measure it, then how can you make sure that you've achieved what you wanted to do? So that's the it's not the heart, but it's really an important element to take into account. And we do measure. We have been measuring since 2009 the progress that we've been making, and you know, Michelle is never happy about the progress that we're making. We're making progress, but we need to make more progress. But really, what's important also is to convince our own people, because some people in the organization may be convinced that gender balance, for example, is a key to performance and is a driver of performance. But if we want it to really happen, we need to convince everybody in the organization. And so far, we only could use external studies. We had the conviction, and Michel Landel has always had the conviction, that having a balanced team, a balanced management team, is going to bring more performance. But how can you prove that, and how can you make sure that people follow this concept and promote more women? So we decided to invest in a specific study. Instead of relying always on external studies, we decided to make our own study. And because we're a big company, we can have a good sample. So we studied, we covered about 50,000 employees, managers, from site managers to the C-suite across 100 entities in the organization. And we looked at those teams that are more gender balanced. A gender balanced management team would be a team which has between 40 and 60% of men or women in their team. A non-gender balanced team, which we call category 2, would be a team which has less than 40% women, or maybe more than 60% women. We have that in some of the Nordic countries, for example. And we looked at those teams, and we looked at indicators that we follow on a regular basis for our day-to-day business. Non-financial indicators such as engagement rate, brand image of the company, client retention, but also financial indicators such as profitability or organic growth. And we looked at how those two categories of teams, the gender balanced ones and the non-balanced ones, perform. And we saw that over the past 3 years, because the study covered the performance of the past 3 years, those gender balanced teams were always more performing than the non-balanced teams in terms of engagement rate, in terms of growth of the revenues, in terms of profitability over 3 years, in terms of brand image. We have those indicators. We just had never crossed them with, is the team gender balanced or not? Are there equal number of men and women in the management team? So this study, it was really good, because we were like, okay, so what we believe is actually true. It now helps us convince our own people and also convey the message to the outside, to our stakeholders, our shareholders also, our suppliers, our clients, that what we're doing and how we're investing the money is worthwhile. It is going to bring performance, and it is going to bring a better company, to make us a better company from financial and non-financial perspective.
It does sound very head, and I can see Yasmin jumping at the bit, so go ahead.
My point is that I understand totally the need for measurement and statistics in order to prove the business case, but ultimately it's a moral issue. You know, McKinsey was saying that it's going to take 100 years for us to reach gender parity at C-suite roles. I haven't got 100 years, and neither is my 6-year-old daughter. So I don't disagree with the idea that we have to measure, we have to prove the case, but it is actually something that just should be done.
With that.
I was hearing applause there.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, but it may not take 100 years in the case of Sodexo. So I mean, I think there's we have to
No,
look at the glass half. I just wanted
actually-
to ask you on the measurement front, when you're looking at social impact and social enterprise, are you looking at this measurement question? I know that personally you have a bit of an issue, but what do you think?
Absolutely.
And by the way, I am sympathetic to it. You don't have to reduce everything down in certain senses, but it's powerful.
No, absolutely. And we do have to look at social impact. You just have to be careful about what we're measuring, and that we're not, certainly on the social impact for NGOs and women's empowerment organisations, that we don't trap them into taking too many statistics and not actually getting the job done on the ground. So there is a balance. We within business have the tools by which we can measure to show impact. It's less easy for an NGO, so sometimes we have to be more flexible.
If it can be reassuring, we didn't wait for this study to start doing the work.
You didn't.
We started in 2009, and only in 2015 did we get the study.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think there is a little bit of a leap of faith. As I said, there's all this macro data. People intuitively know that this is going to lead to the sort of the right result. It may not in every case, but pretty much that seems to be a path. But I think the way you bring people along is the more data you have. You don't need a randomized control trial, but you need sort of plausible data on some of this, for at least some, to convince some people. And so that's my question to you is this study you've done internally, is that being publicized by people? Because I would think that would be great data to get out there.
We're in the process of, it is publicized actually. Because if you go to the little bar where they sell, where they give you kusumi tea and nice coffee, you can grab this magazine that we publish annually, actually for Women's Day, International Women's Day, and here you will find some of the results of this study. So yes, it is public. It has been approved by our official board and external auditors and all that, so the numbers are real. It is public. We just need to be better at communicating about it, both internally and externally. It's still very new, and we have to find the opportunities to talk about it. But as I said, we didn't wait for it to start working on the topic.
One of the enlightened companies.
On the measurement front, I mean, as I said earlier, for us, the OECD without measurement, you wouldn't have much of an OECD. We're also mindful of the fact that the E in OECD is not just economic, it's education, it's energy, it's all sorts of the Better Life Initiative and a Better Life Index that Sodexo has come in with us on as well. And you see for the first time a very traditional conservative organization like the OECD entering into areas of subjective well-being, life satisfaction. That's code for happiness. It's still the OECD. We can't actually use words like that. It's I do, but they'll tick me off. Or how you feel. We were talking earlier on. How many of us have had a mental checkup in the room? It's very hard to see you. A mental checkup, not a physical checkup of your health, but a check of your mental health. Exactly. It's not very common. I've got one person in the room. I want to talk to you afterwards because I want to see where I can get one. I think we've done very well because we've gone through here on stage. Now, the lighting here is such that I can hardly see the audience. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring some people from the audience in now. We've got about 10 minutes. For you to violently contradict or agree or bring up issues that you think we haven't actually tackled and we've done a bad job so far. I have. So please don't be shy. Stick your hands up. There's a lady in the second row in front of me here.
I'm the one with the mental checkup. I'm a New Yorker, just comes naturally to us. Win-Win Coalition. You talked a lot about the integrated approach and connecting to the grassroots women through the women's funds. I was wondering if you could give an example of how a women's fund could work with a company, or how they have worked in the past on dealing with some of these other issues that we heard in McKinsey, access to finance or health care or child care, something concrete.
There are a couple of good examples. The Brazilian Women's Fund, Fundo Elas, has been involved with a number of corporations. They worked with Chevron in helping Chevron go into communities where they wanted to do some work within the communities to build small businesses in those communities by bringing together women in the communities, figuring out what those women wanted to do, and then providing capacity building as well as monitoring and evaluation. And they did that on a fee-for-service basis with Chevron because they had connections with a lot of the groups in the communities. Ellis also worked with Avon, who, as many of you know, one of their sort of big corporate issues has always been domestic violence. It's one of the issues that they have a large population of women as employees and customers, and that's always been an issue for them. And in Brazil, they asked Ellis to, they worked with Ellis, they partnered with them to do a joint request for proposal to find really innovative new types of programs to counter domestic violence, looking at things like sports and how to tie it into professional economic opportunity. And they together chose 31 projects, and Avon through this funded 31 projects, and Ellis, really helped because by bringing the people in and helping to evaluate the programs and again working on capacity building and monitoring and evaluation, as well as bringing a whole network together of journalists and other donors and other people to connect these groups to, so they could help build their base as well. So those are just a couple of examples that have happened.
Great, thank you.
Let me take the gentleman just behind you to my left. Oh, sorry. I beg your pardon. The lighting is appalling. My eyesight
I'll
as well.
stand up. It'll be more obvious. Sorry, no, quite all right, quite all right. I guess I'm so inspired by the Sodexo story, because I'm from the International Center for Research on Women. My name's Catherine Fritz. And I guess I want to go a little bit deeper into the measurement question, because I'm curious whether or not you've collected some data that would help us understand the pathways through which gender diversity on a team actually lead to these enhanced business outcomes. And also whether you're collecting data from employees about what it is that you're doing so far that they like and what they'd like to see more of in the future.
So for the first question, I'm not sure we've studied that deep into it. The first thing that we wanted to know was, is a gender balanced team more efficient, and does it bring more performance than a non-balanced team? And this is actually as far as we've gone. I don't think that we have studied yet why it happens, but from talking to various people, who some of them in different countries who work in men-only teams, and we have a lot of them, obviously, because some of the businesses that we're in are very men-driven. If you work on an oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, it's going to be mostly men. On the reverse, if you work in Sakhalin Island in Russia, actually it's going to be more women working, and it's going to be very often women-only teams, just because the men are drunk in the street and the women are the ones who work, if I may be blunt. But talking to people who have balanced teams, and even in France, where very often it's a little bit of a taboo topic, it's like people don't like to say that we have to promote women in particular, and women especially, and women. So, but the men do recognize that when they hire women, their team is more balanced, obviously, but they have more ideas. It's more creative. The atmosphere is much stronger. It's not just a testosterone fight all the time, and it soothes people. It actually helps to have a balance. And similarly, when in environments where we have more women and they bring men in the team, they also like it, because it's not cat fights and I'm just, you know, stereotyping the thing, but it actually, I don't know how it works, and we haven't studied it specifically from the social and sociological point of view, but it does work when you bring men in women's team or women in men's team. It just makes it smoother. And what was the second question again? Yeah. We actually have our engagement survey that is run every 2 years across the entire organization, from employee at the site to top management, and we do include questions about gender balance and satisfaction, and we analyze the results of this engagement survey. We have a specific question asking people if they're happy about the diversity policy that Sodexo is carrying out, and usually the results are strong. And we also look at whether men or women are happier and more engaged concerning this or that topic. So we do look at this from this perspective.
We're very tight for time, so I'm going to ask 3 people to come in. It doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment. Megan, Rohini, and the lady, I think, in the 6th row with the hand up. I'm taking a chance. If it's a man, I'm just really sorry. I'm a bit blind, as you can see.
Anthony, can I follow up on that? Anthony, Rohini here.
Yeah.
Can I follow up on what the question that was raised? So I think that's a really, really good question, and I actually work for Sodexo as well. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer there. I think just to amplify a little bit about what Nataliane said, it's a 2-part deal, right? So you're talking about representation and the correlation between representation of women and the business success in our KPIs. But there's another part there, which is the inclusion part. And what we found is that in these gender balanced teams, there is also more of an inclusive culture that's in part created by the higher representation of women. And that's what leads to the innovation, that's what leads to the productivity, and that's what leads to the better KPIs. So as Nataliane said, the connection there with the engagement survey is when we look at the engagement survey, our engagement survey, which is done by a third-party external vendor, we actually find that on a lot of dimensions, a lot of the questions, women answer that they're extremely satisfied. So the second part of your question was a satisfaction. We don't look at just one question, which is the diversity question, or 2 questions. We look at all of the questions and parse that data by gender, by age, to see what the temperature is in the organization. So I think there's the 2 parts to it. It's the representation, but also the connection between the representation and a more inclusive culture. And the last question, quick point I'll make
Rohini,
is after 60%, the performance plateaus.
Just want everyone to get a chance. Come in.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Megan Falone, and I represent the Barefoot College. I'm the CEO of Barefoot College International, and we are a client, very blessedly, of Hogan Lovells. I'll be really brief, because I'd just like to touch on 3 really essential points from my point of view, which is the point of view of someone trying to make impact and designing for and focused on how we can get maximum transformation Barefoot College through empowering women across all of the solutions that we run in 72 countries. What the partnership with Hogan Lovells has given to us is a capacity building block. It's something that we would never have been able to have, and it gives us a reach and an ability to address policy level, to address government level, to have access to real movers and shakers when we need to have our impact amplified. And so I think it's an absolutely invaluable resource for us. But there's another thing that happens in that, is that we learn as an organization tremendously through our partnerships with the private sector. We learn lots of things about how better to communicate what we're doing in languages that they'll understand and that the outside world will understand. And that leads me to my last point, which is about monitoring and evaluation. We don't like to call it measurement and evaluation. It is essential to do effective monitoring and evaluation, but one must design that for impact, always, and never forgetting why you're doing it. In our case, we're doing it for 2 reasons. One, because so that we can innovate better programs, and we know what impact is working and what isn't on the ground, but also to be able to talk to the outside world about very, very specific quantitative and qualitative indicators that allow them to understand that the empowerment of women is about changing social norms. And whether you're in the developed world or the developing world, you must understand that this issue of gender parity is about changing social norms and about changing the sanctions and addressing the sanctions that exist around not having gender parity. So it becomes a very strong learning process, I think, between the private sector and the public sector, as well as the NGO and not-for-profit sector, that we can't actually solve these problems, any of us alone. But together we have this incredible strength.
Well, I think that's a fantastic last word, which saves me from trying to conclude the session, which would be extremely difficult to conclude. You've done it really well. Thank you for that. My apologies to the person who had her hand up. I'm afraid it's just a little bit too much, and there are men dressed in black who look rather mean on the right. So I may not be invited back here. I'd just like to thank the three panelists, and please join me in doing so.